Okay, we are on our last lecture, the mammals. Yay! Dun dun dun. So, I'm going to show you some images of mammals. Mammals are a truly charismatic and diverse group. There are a number of different sizes and shapes and types of mammals that are even more diverse than I think most people realize. Everything from, of course, primates that are closely related to us, to lemurs, strange mole-like creatures. Elephants, of course, are one of the most charismatic ones. We have whales, dolphins, all kinds of cetaceans. We have egg-laying mammals, duck-billed platypus and echidnas, armadillos, some of Michigander's favorite mammals, the deer, and of course many of our pets. So this is a group that's incredibly diverse and has not necessarily the largest number of species, but certainly one of the most diverse range of species within this group. So there are currently recognized approximately 5,400 species, although new species are being described all the time, less so for mammals than for some other groups. And mammals occur in pretty much every possible environment on the planet that you can visit. Everything from the land to the air in the case of bats, to the water in the case of whales. And of course, they come in a variety of sizes and shapes from very, very small to incredibly large. Mammals are one of the few groups that have been heavily influenced by humans. So we have domesticated a number of different species for a variety of purposes. For instance, three of the main groups that we have domesticated include cows and their relatives, sheep and goat, and pigs. And these are all animals that have been domesticated either for our consumption, so we eat their meat, or we eat products from them, so milk that we might drink as is or make into cheeses. And then we also use their hides for clothing or for other purposes. We have also domesticated a number of horse species as, if you will, beasts of burden. So either needing them for locomotion to get to where we wanted to go, or to help us to plow fields, carry things on carts for us. So typical sort of beast of burden. By the way, I saw this picture about spat my coffee out. It was so funny. This burro is being pulled up by this cart. Clearly the cart's too heavy. And we've also domesticated a number of lines of mammals, particularly rodents, for use in medical research. And so there are many labs that test medicines or products on model organisms before they use them on humans in hopes of sparing humans any sorts of problems in future. So mammals are a group that are not only just diverse, but have been incredibly useful to us as humans. So let's talk about the defining features of mammals. One of the most charismatic ones is, of course, the hair. So there's a number of different types of hair that are found on mammals, and those hairs serve a variety of purposes. So, and it doesn't matter which mammals you're talking about. All mammals do have hair. It just might be that it's not very abundant, and so you're not even aware that it's there. But if you look closely, you'll see it. So even cetaceans have hairs on them. So if you do a close-up on the skin, so the skins of mammals are very similar to all the rest of the vertebrates that we've explored in terms of the general layers. But as it happens, mammalian skin is much thicker than most other classes of vertebrates. And there are, of course, as we've already mentioned, two major layers to the skin. There's the epidermal layer, which is the topmost, and is external. And then there's the dermal layer. So these together form the skin. This hypodermis is a subcutaneous layer that's a little bit separate. And hair follicles are found in the skin. They go well into the dermal layer, although technically they're of epidermal origin, but they go well into the to the dermal layer. And these are derived from previous glands. Generally speaking, the hair is composed of keratin, and for most mammals tends to grow throughout life, but the way that it grows may differ. And by that I mean there are single hairs that may, hairs will continue to grow out that follicle for life, or you might find that they only grow to a certain length and then a new hair begins to form at the base of the follicle and pushes the previous hair out. Most mammals will shed their hair or fur, which is sometimes referred to as molting. They will shed their hair once a year, or in some cases twice a year. Often there is a sort of massive shed where they lose a lot of hair at once. For other mammals, it's a continuous, they just lose it throughout the year. So the coats, or the fur coats of most mammals, are referred to as their pelage. And the pelage is comprised of two kinds of hair. The underhair, which is dense and soft, and that the primary function of that hair is for insulation, so it keeps you nice and warm. The guard hairs are what you usually come in contact with on top. So that's hair that's coarser, it's usually longer, and it provides protection against wear, as well as providing coloration that can be incredibly important to some mammals for camouflage. So these are the two primary types of hair, but there's a third type of hair that you find on most mammals. Oh, sorry, here's a picture. So this is the guard hair on top. It's thick and coarse. And then underneath is this dense underhair here. So guard hair, underhair. And then a third form of hair is the vibrissae, or the whiskers. You can have sensory hairs that are on other places of the body, but generally speaking, they're on the face or around the snout. And they help you to sense the environment with great accuracy. And this is an example of a porcupine. So there are many mammals that will have modified hairs that form other functions. And so they'll have like spines and prickles on them. And so those are modified hairs that have a specific function, in this case for defense. So other features of mammals that are characteristic of the group. So all mammals here with three middle ear bones that you're probably familiar with, called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And these are three bones that are derived from the articular and the quadrate, as well as the hyomandibular bones of precursor mammals. So to give you a closer feel for this, so here's an image of the human ear, and here's the tympanum here. So if you stick a Q-tip in your ear, that's what it's going to hit first. And here are what are referred to as the ear ossicles. So the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, these three bones here. These three bones are what we hear with, combined with the tympanum. And these are connected to our auditory nerves pretty directly. Now, these are derived from several bones in precursors to the mammals. So we're going to talk about the evolution of these early forms, but if you just focus on the colored bones here, this is where the quadrate is, so it's part of your, your jaw. Here's the articular, this yellow articular bone, and here's the angular bone. So the ones that we're most concerned with here are the blue and the yellow. And so you can see that over time, these were much bigger in pelycosaurs. In therapsids, they have become minimized. And then in the earliest mammals, you can see they are combined, again, with the shortening of the angular bone, also referred to as the hyomandibular. They become miniaturized, and they change in their orientation, and ultimately these have evolved into our ear ossicles, and that's what we hear with. Of course, mammary glands are one of the most characteristic features of mammals. All mammals nurse their young with milk that's produced from mammary glands, and that action is referred to as lactation. The placement of the mammary glands among mammals is highly variable. In this picture of a dog here, you can see that there are many mammary glands, so several teats, that are placed down near the pelvic girdle. But in some mammals, in humans and in primates and in others, the mammary glands are up by the chest. And the difference in location of these mammary glands is a result usually of locomotion. It has an impact on the center of balance and how well you're able to move when you're in lactation mode. And then, of course, there are some mammals that, in fact, do have mammary glands, but you're probably not even aware that they have them. So dolphins and whales, they all have them, but they don't have teats. And so what they do is they lactate through a little patch on the skin, and their young lap up the milk, either from patches on their skin, or in the case of aquatic mammals, it's actually because milk is usually so dense with fat, it usually hovers in the water, and they just drink it up from the water. And then later we're going to talk about some of the egg-laying mammals and how they actually lactate and provide milk for their young. So mammals are well known for having well-developed nervous systems, and their brains are quite well developed, especially as you work your way up the phylogeny to humans. So what I'm showing you here is a difference in sizes of brains, but remember that when you're talking about the development of the brain, you need to look at the different sections of the brain and their functions. And so size doesn't necessarily tell you much about how well developed the nervous system is, because that's relative to body size. So you have to correct for body size when you talk about brain size. But that said, what's clearly occurred throughout mammalian evolution is a very big difference in the cerebrum and in general the neocortex. To show you a better indication of this, here are some images from the web, and colored in blue is the neocortex. And what you see here going from mice to monkeys to humans is an increasing development in this neocortex. It's become much more developed, much larger, and you're seeing lots of increased sulci and gyri. So we talked about that in the last lecture, those valleys and hills, or the grooves in the brain. So the more of that you have, the greater your capabilities are with those regions of the brain. Here's another image to show you this. This is a comparison of mouse and monkey. And the blue, again, is the neocortex. And you can see how relatively smooth it is in the mouse brain, but look how complex and convoluted it is in the monkey, showing much greater development for a variety of different purposes. So this region is used for functions such as conscious thought, for sensory perception, spatial reasoning and language, memory. All these things are related to the neocortex. Another feature of mammals is the diaphragm, and although we talked about the diaphragm in the last lecture, and we talked about rib ventilation in the last couple of lectures, but just to remind you that mammals all do respire with rib ventilation that's accomplished with the diaphragm, which moves up and down. It's a muscular structure that moves up and down and allows for the inflation and deflation of the lungs. Another very important characteristic of mammals is the placenta. But not all mammals have the sort of placenta that you're maybe thinking of with respect to humans. So remember when we talked at the beginning of the amniota, how the evolution of the amniote egg and all the different membranes that went along with that. So the chorion, the allantois, the amnion, and the yolk sac. So all of these membranes are there in the amniote egg, but those membranes are still present in placental mammals. But there's some interesting variation within the groups of mammals. Specifically, there are three main groups of mammals that I want you to be most familiar with. We're not going to go into all the gory detail of all the mammalian families and orders. We're just going to talk about three main groups. So the first group are the placentals, and this is the most familiar one too. These are humans. And this is an image showing you a human fetus, and it's within its amniotic sac, so it's still covered by a water sac. And then you can see the umbilical cord here, which is attached to the placenta. The placenta is this nice fleshy membrane that grows once the zygote has implanted in the uterus. And so here it is in the uterus. And just to zoom in, so here's the umbilical cord. And within the umbilical cord, you have the circulatory system. So blood is being is flowing through the fetus and is being cleansed by the mother's system. You have a nutrient cord that's passing nutrients to the baby. And I think I've got another image here. Here we go. So here's a close-up of, here's the umbilical cord inside where the baby is. And you can see the blood vessels. This is the placenta that grows when the fetus implants on the uterus, and this is the uterine lining. So this is the part of mom, and you can see how these uh, blood vessels are innervated here or intercalated into the placenta. And so there's a transfer of nutrients to and from the baby through that. Now, this is a very different situation from what you have. So these are the placentals. This is very different from what you have in monotremes and marsupials. So the Monotremata is a group that includes two species, the duck-billed platypus and the echidna. And these are egg-laying mammals and the only species of mammals that lay eggs. Although we do know that ancestors leading up to the mammals, and I'll show you that in a moment, they also laid eggs and they had a classic sort of amniotic egg. Once that egg was born, and that's unusual, and I'll show you a video of this in a moment. Once that egg was born, in these species, the young then nurse from the mom from little milk patches that are on their abdomen. Here's the size of the eggs. They're very, very small. This is a quarter. And let me show you this video that highlights the lifestyle, at least of the echidnas. Oh, really? Hang on. Oh, unbelievable. All right, let's try this again.
This walking, sniffing ball of spines is an echidna. It's a mother on a mission. She's hunting for ants and termites. To find them underground or under wood, she uses her strong sense of smell and another, weirder sense. Studies suggest that special cells in her beak are sensitive to the electromagnetic signals emitted by all living things. It's a sense usually found in sharks and rays, but the echidna may be the only land mammal that has the ability to search for food this way. She's uncovered a colony of ants and uses her long, sticky tongue to slurp them up. She needs the nutrition. She's already given birth to an egg. Echidnas, along with their cousin, the platypus, are the only egg-laying mammals in the world. The egg incubates in a simple pouch under her belly. Inside, a baby echidna, called a puggle, develops. After about 10 days, the egg hatches. The puggle stays inside the pouch, nursing from its mother's milk and packing on the ounces. 2 months later, the puggle starts to grow spines. That's its mother's cue to move it to a burrow, where she'll continue to take care of it for 7 more months. All that effort means a lot of food. So her mission remains the same: find more to eat.
Neat. Weird, those critters, aren't they? So one of the benefits, of course, of the amniote egg that we previously discussed was that you no longer have those ties to water. So now you can move away from the water. But one problem with laying your eggs is you either need to stay with them to protect them from predators, which means more than likely you can't eat at the same time, or you have to go away. You can go eat, but then you've just left your eggs behind, and they could be damaged by predators or just by accident. So it's believed that one of the major evolutionary advances among mammals is that they began to carry their eggs inside them, and so they evolved from this egg-laying situation to the placental condition. So let me contrast the monotremata with the next group, and post-hatching they lap up milk from the belly for the mother. The next group is the marsupials. So these are the familiar kangaroos, wallabies. It includes the koalas, Tasmanian devils, and of course the common opossum that we see in the United States. So they have a slightly different reproductive system. They do not lay eggs, but they aren't. They have a slightly different reproductive tract and system than the typical placentals do. So here's an image of the reproductive tract, sort of a stylized reproductive tract for placental mammals. Here's the vagina and the uterus. Here's where the fetus would grow, and then here's the ovaries, the sites of location for the eggs that then traveled into the uterus. In the case of marsupials, though, one of the features that's unique and strange is the arrangement of their reproductive tract. So they have this sort of what's referred to as the pseudo-vaginal birth canal, and then these lateral vagina. And so they can have fetuses that begin their growth here, and they can have 2, sometimes 3. Here's some small uteri here. But where the differences really show through is what happens in the development. So once their eggs have been fertilized, they do grow for a short period of time here in the reproductive tract. But then the joeys are birthed when they're very, very small. And then they crawl up and make it into a pouch that the females have in their abdomen. So let me show you a video about more of that.
Licking her pouch.
And back it up. There you go.
That most extraordinary process is signaled by a tamer wallaby licking her pouch.
So she licks a trail from her vagina up to her pouch to assist the joey traveling up to eggs. It's an arduous
The
task.
birth is only the start of an arduous journey. Before it's even clawed its way free of the membrane, the young responds to gravity, resisting its pull, heading upwards towards the pouch.
Unfortunately, this video is pretty pixelated.
The licking is not so much to clean a path as to keep the way moist and prevent this tiny creature from drying out. That's all the help it gets from its mother. The baby is only fingertip size, but its forearms and claws are well developed and strong enough to haul it up through the jungle of its mother's fur. Its chest and lungs, too, are already quite large to gulp in vital air on the long climb. Once it reaches the lip of the pouch, it's probably scent that guides the little creature deep inside to one of the 4 nipples.
The number of nipples among marsupials varies, so opossums can have up to 13.
Its tiny jaws clamp onto the nipple, which then expands inside the mouth, locking the youngster firmly in place. The composition of the milk changes to match the baby's growing needs, becoming steadily richer in fats and proteins. But there's a grimmer option too. If conditions turn bad, the flow of milk stops and the baby dies, saving the mother's resources. Full term in the pouch lasts nearly 6 months. Then the baby has its second birth into the world outside. These first excursions are quite brief. The pouch will be home for some months yet. Pouches are put to good advantage in Australia's unpredictable environment. They're convenient baby carriers while parents search for better pastures. With a flexible means of reproduction and an efficient means of travel, the kangaroos were set to advance with the spreading grasslands.
Neat, huh? And then we already covered the case of what's happening with the placental mammals. So that was our first group. So the three major groups of mammals I want you to be familiar with are the placentals, the marsupials, and the monotremes. And know the features that characterize each. Okay, so let's talk about the evolution of mammals. So this is an image from your textbook showing some of the early ancestors leading up to the class Mammalia. And so let's briefly review some of these. So you'll recall that we talked about the different skull fenestrae in the amniotes. And so there's the anapsid condition where there's no fenestra behind the eye. There's no there's with one hole is the synapsida, and then with two holes is the diapsida. So this is a line that is evolved from a synapsid ancestor that you can see here that originated in the Paleozoic. And then following that were a group of ancestors, and they're only showing you one image here, but there's a group of ancestors referred to the Pelycosaurs. Oh, sorry. So here's an image of the synapses just to remind you from your book. So here's the lateral temporal opening. So one hole. So the Pelycosaurs were the first group of animals that looked, some of which looked like this. So this is a familiar one that you may have seen in movies. This is Dimetrodon. It's famous because it's got this giant sail on its back. And some of the Pelycosaurs, there was one subgroup of them that had these sails. There's another group that lacked them. But what you'll notice is they look sort of lizard-like. They did have these huge, some of them had these huge sails that were thought to perform a thermoregulatory function. So it allowed them to heat up and cool down. Notice particularly what's happening with their legs. So their legs are splayed out from their body at sort of a 90-degree angle, and they probably waddled along when they locomoted on land. This group was followed later by a group of theraspids. So this roughly translated as erect gait. So one example that you may or may not be familiar with are the gorgonopsids. So these are animals that have, by the way, greater specialization in their dentition. That's a theme that we're going to see a lot in the mammals. Their fore and hind limbs are now placed, instead of being lateral to their bodies, they're more directly underneath their bodies, which is a much more efficient gait for moving rapidly. These were animals that were known to be very active predators and fast moving, believed to be endothermic at this point. And this group was followed by, there were several species in this group. These were followed by the cynodonts. So this is just one example of a recreation from fossils by artists in museums. Despite the fact that this guy looks a lot like a Komodo dragon, this is a Procinosuchus. These guys also had specializations in dentition. They, despite the look in this picture, they did have a more erect gait. And by the way, it's thought that all three of these lineages, Pelycosaurs, early theraspids, and cynodonts, probably all did lay eggs like you find in the monotremata. And then after them, so this is a different phylogeny from your book. So here you have different pelycosaur groups, therapsids here, and then cynodonts. And notice the taxonomy here listed at the top. So all of this together is the Synapsida. Once you pass through the pelycosaurs, therapsids and the rest are referred to as the Therapsida. Once you get to the cynodonts, these are the Cynodonta. And then the class Mammalia includes early mammalian groups, which we haven't gone into great detail of. And then that's followed by the monotremes, the marsupials, and then the eutherians, or the placental mammals. So notice that the eutherians and the marsupials are more closely related to each other and are sister taxa relative to the egg-laying monotremes. So if you look at the evolution of several characters within the mammals and ancestral mammal relatives, what you find is a change in synapsid openings, and you can see sort of the movement through these groups using these three lineages here, and if you'll notice these lines. So you have a large opening here, a smaller opening, and in some cases a closing of that hole. I already mentioned that there are posture changes from the pelycosaur to therapsids and beyond, where you have lateral limbs that then go underneath the body. There's a huge development in teeth structure from simple, so they're still in sockets, they're inserted into sockets, but from peg-like teeth to more well-developed teeth that correspond to whatever it is that you're eating. So, and I'm going to show you some images in just a moment, but so the teeth of herbivores have many incisors for snipping off food, as well as molars for crushing them and breaking up all that cellulose in the plant matter. To canines with large canine teeth for grasping prey, holding onto them and ripping the food out. To specializations in some of the insectivores, and I'll show you those teeth in just a moment. So there's a development of the jaw musculature and the types of teeth. And there's also a huge expansion in the cerebellum that corresponds, again, to cognition, perception, memory. In the cynodonts, there's further jaw muscular development and dentition development. And this is just to show you, by the way, here is clearly a reproduction of a human skull. There's another couple of features that begins to develop in the cynodonts and beyond. And in particular, I want you to notice the nose here. So inside the nose are these special, really thin, bony structures that are called turbinate bones. And what those do is it allows, they're highly vascularized in there. And what they do is they heat up your breath as it's coming in and out of your nose, so that when it goes in your into your head, it's warmed up and it doesn't freeze up the membranes in your nose. And so it allows your breath to be much warmer, and so it's probably an adaptation to living in cooler areas. You also have a bony secondary palate, which you don't see in this image, but I talked about last time. That allows mammals and other animals that possess it, things like crocodiles, to be able to breathe and eat at the same time. And there's also the development of the diaphragm, not just in the mammals, but it's fully developed in the mammals. Okay, so the classic features of the mammalia were present by the late Triassic, so about 200 million years ago. And as I mentioned before, we're not going to go into much of the taxonomy of the mammals, with the exception of talking about monotremes, marsupials, and eutherians, which I've already covered the major features of. So let's talk about a little more details. So mammals are also quite famous for their development of glands. And within the mammals, there are 4 basic types of glands that you see. There's sweat glands to allow for cooling. There are scent glands that are used for marking territories and communicating a number of different things. There are sebaceous or oil glands that help to keep the fur smooth and supple, as well as to oil the skin and keep it from drying out, among other things. And then mammary glands are derived from sebaceous glands, and these are, of course, used for lactation and nursing our young. So I talked about the development of dentition from the cynodonts and beyond. And so there's a number of terms that you should be familiar with. So when we refer to homodont dentition, that means that all of your teeth are the same kind. So maybe you had the same kind of peg-like tooth among all your teeth. Heterodont dentition refers to the fact that you have more than one kind of tooth type in your mouth. And so the ones that you're probably most familiar with are molars, which are usually big, kind of squarish, have several cusps in there for grinding material. You have incisors that are used for snipping off bits of material. You have canines that are used for ripping meat or grasping onto prey, depending on how well developed they are, and so forth. And if you look at a variety of mammalian skulls and examine their jaw shape and musculature as well as their dentition, it's highly indicative as to what they're eating. For instance, you have some animals that have huge incisors that actually grow throughout life and continue to be sharpened throughout life. And they use these for jawing for gnawing on a variety of things, including, in this case, vegetative material. So this is an example of a beaver. So they have these snipping teeth here, and then there's nothing in between that and the molars that they have behind, and they have several molars in the upper and lower jaws that are used for grinding up that vegetative material that they're taking in. Carnivores, on the other hand, have very large, sharp canines that are used for grasping prey. They do have incisors that they use in combination with them to help them rip pieces of meat off of the prey that they've killed. And then they do have some molars that allow them to help process some of that meat before it goes down. You have what are referred to as piscivorous animals that have mostly just sharp, pointy teeth that allow them to grab fish, and then they swallow them whole. And then there's all kinds of specializations from the different types of dentition. You have insectivores that have specialized teeth that have sharp cusps on them so that they can break through the chitinous exoskeletons of their prey items. You have anteaters that have not much in the way of dentition. It's mostly tongues that allow them to grasp the ants and to consume them, and all kinds of variations on that theme. And one of the last features I want to talk about are horns and antlers. So these are characteristics of certain groups of mammals. But there's often confusion regarding the difference between horns and antlers. So horns are hollow sheaths of keratinized epidermis that surround a core of bone that arises from the skull. And most importantly, these are not shed. Okay, unlike antlers, which are shed every year, these are not shed. Generally speaking, they're not branched, although there are a few exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, they're not branched. They do grow continuously, and with a few exceptions, you do find them in both sexes. So both males and females will have these horns. And so a classic example is the bovidae. So, and here are some images of some examples of these guys where both males and females have them. They're quite large, and in this case, this poor guy has some really huge horns that are seemingly obscuring his view. So this is in contrast to antlers. So these are composed of solid bone, okay? They're generally shed annually. There's a couple of exceptions, but generally they're shed annually. They may be branched, and generally speaking, they're in just the males. Females don't usually have them, but there are some exceptions. And the cervidae are the most famous example of these, so like our local deer. And this is a series of cartoons that shows you what happens with at least white-tailed deer. So generally, after they're about a year old, in the summertime or late fall, they begin to grow antlers. And of course, with each year, those antlers get bigger and bigger and have more and more tines on them. And so this would be, say a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old deer here. What happens is the antlers grow, and generally as they grow over the summer, they're covered with velvet, so they're highly vascularized on the outside with this fur. The velvet is then lost in the fall. It drops off, and you have just solid bone underneath. And they use these in battles with other males to defend territories and access to females. And then generally speaking, after they've all mated, around Christmas time or just thereafter, maybe January, the antlers fall off, and heal up on the skull, and then it starts all over again the next spring. Okay, that's all I really want you to know about the mammals. This is our last lecture, so we'll cover this material on Monday, perhaps finish it up on Wednesday, but I got a feeling we'll get through most of it on Monday. And then we'll have a review for the final exam in class on Wednesday, and then we're done for the semester except for the final.